The crystal champagne flutes clinked like wind chimes as I balanced them on my tray, weaving through the sea of designer gowns and tailored suits. The ballroom of the Rosewood Hotel glittered with chandeliers that cast diamond-like reflections across every surface, and the air smelled of expensive perfume, aged whiskey, and that particular scent of wealth, a subtle mixture of entitlement and power that seemed to permeate everything. I moved through the crowd like a ghost, which was exactly what I was supposed to be. Invisible, efficient, beneath notice. Champagne, miss, I offered to a woman dripping in emeralds, my voice small and practiced. She didn't even look at me, just plucked a glass from my tray and continued her conversation as if I were nothing but a floating tray of drinks. I was used to it by now. 3 years of serving the elite of Harbor City had taught me that invisibility was part of the uniform. My black polyester dress clung uncomfortably in a humid ballroom, a stark contrast to the flowing silks and satins surrounding me. My feet already ached in the mandatory heels, and we were only 2 hours into the 8-hour charity gala. The Children's Hospital benefit, they called it, though I doubted half these people even liked children. I'd taken this extra shift because rent was due next week, and the tips from these events sometimes meant the difference between electricity and darkness in my cramped studio apartment. My son Leo was spending the night at my mother's again. At 5 years old, he was already used to his daddy working nights and weekends. The thought made my chest tighten. Watch it. A man in a midnight blue suit snarled as he bumped into me, nearly toppling my tray. Not his fault, of course. I was the one expected to have eyes in the back of my head. "I'm sorry, sir," I murmured automatically, steadying the glasses with practiced precision. That's when I first noticed him. The little boy sat alone at a table near the corner, legs dangling from a chair too high for his small frame. While children ran in excited packs across the dance floor, he remained perfectly still, meticulously aligning the silverware in front of him. One fork, one knife, one spoon, over and over in different arrangements. His small face was locked in concentration, dark eyebrows furrowed over deep brown eyes. His suit was impeccable, custom-tailored charcoal gray, with a burgundy pocket square that matched his bow tie. But it was his complete solitude that caught my attention. In a room full of people, no one seemed to notice him. I made my way around the perimeter of the ballroom, dropping off empty glasses and collecting new ones every few minutes. My eyes drifted back to the boy. A couple approached his table, but instead of acknowledging him, they simply took empty chairs from his table and moved away. The boy didn't look up. "Leo, table 6 needs fresh napkins, and don't forget you're helping with dessert service in 20, my supervisor Marcos hissed as he passed, clipboard clutched to his chest like a shield. I nodded and hurried toward the service area, but something made me pause near the boy's table. That's when I noticed the commotion, the kind of subtle disturbance that ripples through crowds when someone important enters a room. The scent hit me first. It rolled across the ballroom like a wave of something dark and dangerous, cedar and smoke and a metallic tang of power, layered with the unmistakable undertone of alpha dominance, so potent it made my knees weak. Every omega in the room seemed to straighten involuntarily, their instincts responding before their minds could catch up. I looked up, and that's when I saw him. He didn't so much walk as command the space around him. Tall, taller than most men in the room, with shoulders that strained against his perfectly tailored black suit. His hair was dark with silver at the temples that somehow made him look more dangerous rather than older. His face could have been carved from stone, all sharp angles and cold symmetry. But it was his eyes that caught the breath in my throat, dark as night and just as bottomless, scanning the room with the calculated precision of a predator. His scent intensified as he moved through the crowd, an intoxicating blend of authority and barely leashed violence. I felt my own omega instincts warring within me, every cell screaming danger, 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 while something deeper, more primal whispered mine. 2 men flanked him, their bulky frames failing to conceal the outline of weapons beneath their jackets. They moved in perfect synchrony, creating a bubble of space around him that no one dared to penetrate. I could smell them too, betas, professional and loyal, but their scents were nothing compared to the Alpha's overwhelming presence. I knew who he was without ever having seen him before. Everyone in Harbor City knew of Alexander Volkov. His name was whispered in fear, his business front-page news, his charity donations celebrated, even while everyone pretended not to know where the money came from. The Russian who had conquered the city's underworld with ruthless efficiency, whose name was synonymous with both terror and respect. The Mafia boss, the monster of Harbor City. He moved through the crowd, which parted like the Red Sea before him. People who had been ignoring me all night suddenly seemed just as invisible as I was. Backs straightened. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Forced smiles appeared on frozen faces. He acknowledged none of it. His gaze was fixed straight ahead. I realized with a start that he was heading toward the little boy. When he reached the table, something remarkable happened. The stone face softened, just barely, but enough that I caught it from across the room. He placed a hand gently on the boy's shoulder and leaned down to speak to him. The boy didn't look up from his silverware, but nodded slightly. Volkov straightened and said something to one of his men, who immediately pulled out his phone and stepped away. A woman in a crimson dress approached, her smile dazzling as she extended her hand to Volkov. He took it briefly, his expression returning to granite. They exchanged words, hers animated, his minimal. Then she glanced at the boy and said something that made Volkov's entire demeanor change. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The woman's smile faltered. She stammered something else, then retreated with as much dignity as she could muster. The Alpha's scent flared, angry, territorial, protective, and I felt it hit me like a physical blow, my body responding before my brain could process. My heart raced. My palms grew damp. Every instinct screamed at me to submit, to show deference to the dominant Alpha who was clearly displeased. I forced myself to breathe, to remember that I was just a waiter. Invisible. Beneath notice. I should have moved on. I had tables to attend to, duties to complete, a job I desperately needed to keep. But I couldn't tear my eyes away from the boy, who continued arranging his silverware, completely unaware of the power dynamics swirling around him. For the next hour, I watched the pattern repeat itself. Volkov would circulate the room, accepting greetings with cold courtesy, conducting brief conversations that looked more like business than pleasure. Every 10 minutes, he would return to check on the boy, who remained alone, focused entirely on his world of perfectly aligned utensils. No one approached the child. No one invited him to join the other children. No one seemed to see him at all. I was refreshing water glasses at a nearby table when I overheard a whispered conversation. That's Volkov's son, the autistic one. I heard the Omega who birthed him is long gone. Can you blame her? Imagine being tied to that family. With a defective child. Shoo, for God's sake, do you want to end up in the harbor? The glasses on my tray rattled as anger surged through me. I thought of my Leo, how fiercely I loved him, how it would tear apart anyone who called him defective. Without thinking, I turned to the whispers. He can probably hear you, I said, my voice low but sharp. For pairs of surprised eyes turned to me, as if shocked that the furniture had suddenly spoken. A woman with a pinched face and diamond earrings the size of grapes raised a perfectly shaped eyebrow. Excuse me? I should have backed down. I should have apologized and scurried away. Instead, I heard myself say, children aren't deaf just because they're different. Maybe show some humanity. I walked away before they could respond, my heart hammering in my chest. Stupid, stupid, stupid. I needed this job. I couldn't afford to antagonize guests, especially the kind who donated enough money to have a hospital wing named after them. The orchestra shifted to a softer melody, waltz that floated through the air like a gentle invitation. On the dance floor, fathers were now dancing with their sons, mothers with their daughters. Family dances, a tradition at these charity events. I watched as a small boy in a blue suit tugged his reluctant father onto the floor, his face breaking into a smile as he was twirled around. My chest ached, thinking of Leo, who had no father to dance with. His sire had disappeared the moment I told him I was pregnant, leaving nothing but a string of unpaid bills and broken promises. My eyes drifted back to the corner table. The boy still sat alone, but now he was watching the dancers, his silverware momentarily forgotten. Something in his expression, a mixture of longing and confusion, cracked something open inside me. Before I could think better of it, I set down my tray on an empty table and walked directly to him. I was vaguely aware of Volkov standing with a group of serious-looking men across the room, but I focused only on the child. I knelt beside his chair, bringing myself to his eye level. "Hi there," I said softly. "My name is Leo. Would you like to dance?" The boy didn't look at me directly, but shifted his gaze to somewhere near my shoulder. "I'm Mikhail," he said, his voice clear and precise. "I don't know how to dance." "That's okay." I smiled. "I can show you. It's easy, I promise." I held out my hand, palm up, making no move to touch him unless he wanted to. "You can say no if you don't want to." "That's perfectly okay too." For a long moment, he stared at my outstretched hand. Then, with deliberate care, he placed his small palm against mine. "Okay," he said. I helped him down from his chair, acutely aware that we were being watched, not just by his father, but by everyone who had been studiously ignoring this child all evening. I led him to the edge of the dance floor, where it was less crowded. "We can start here," I said, "where there's more space. Is that all right?" He nodded, looking down at our feet. "First, you stand on my shoes," I explained. "That's how my mom taught me." Carefully, Mikhail stepped onto the tops of my already aching pumps. I took both his hands in mine, creating a safe distance between us. "Now we just sway a little, like this," I demonstrated, moving gently from side to side. To my surprise, he followed perfectly, his body relaxing slightly as we found a rhythm. "You're a natural," I said. And for the first time, he looked up, almost meeting my eyes. The ghost of a smile flickered across his face. We moved slowly at the edge of the dance floor, a waiter in a cheap uniform, and a little boy in a perfect suit. I hummed along with the music, and after a few minutes, Mikhail began to hum too, matching my tune with perfect pitch. I was so focused on him that I didn't notice the silence spreading across the ballroom until it was complete. The music played on, but conversations had ceased. I looked up to find every eye in the room on us, some curious, some disapproving, some softened with unexpected emotion. And directly across the floor stood Alexander Volkov. His dark gaze was fixed on us with an intensity that made my skin prickle. His expression was unreadable, his body perfectly still. His scent had changed, still that overwhelming alpha musk, but now layered with something else. Something almost like surprise, curiosity. One of his men leaned in to whisper something, but Volkov silenced him with the slightest movement of his hand. In that moment, as I held the hands of the Mafia boss's son, I realized I'd made a terrible mistake. A breach of invisible boundaries I hadn't even known existed. This wasn't just an ignored child. This was the heir of Harbor City's most dangerous man, and I had just placed myself directly in Alexander Volkov's line of sight. I couldn't look away from Volkov's piercing stare. His eyes held mine across the dance floor, dark and unfathomable as a midnight ocean. My pulse quickened, and I had the irrational urge to scoop up Mikhail and run. Instead, I forced myself to continue our gentle swaying, pretending I didn't feel the weight of his father's attention like physical pressure against my skin. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. I whispered to Mikhail, who was still standing on my shoes, his small hands warm in mine. He repeated the count under his breath, perfectly in rhythm. When I finally gathered the courage to look up again, Volkov was moving toward us. He didn't rush. Men like him never needed to hurry, but each purposeful step closed the distance between us with terrifying inevitability. The crowd melted away from his path without him having to say a word. "Dad's coming," Mikhail said matter-of-factly, without turning around. His perfect posture didn't change, but I felt his hands tighten slightly in mine. "Is that okay?" I asked softly. He nodded, still counting under his breath. I braced myself as Volkov reached us, expecting what? A harsh reprimand? A cold dismissal? Security dragging me away? Instead, he simply stood at the edge of the dance floor, watching us with an intensity that made my mouth go dry. Up close, he was even more intimidating. The scar ran along his jaw, pale against his olive skin, the kind of mark left by something sharp and unforgiving. He smelled even better up close. The cedar and smoke, yes, but also something warmer beneath, sandalwood and leather, and the unmistakable scent of an alpha in his prime. My omega instincts went absolutely haywire. "Miss," he said finally, his voice deep and laced with an accent that turned the single syllable into something dangerous. "Sir," I managed to reply, surprised that my voice remained steady. "May I cut in?" The formality was at odds with the command in his tone. Before I could answer, Mikhail spoke up. "We're counting, Dad. 1, 2, 3. His voice was clear and precise, free of the anxiety that was currently strangling my ability to breathe normally. Something flickered across Volkov's face, a softening so subtle I might have imagined it. "Of course. Please continue." To my astonishment, he stepped back, giving us space. But he didn't leave. Instead, he stood guard at the perimeter of our little dance, his presence creating an invisible barrier that no one dared approach. The orchestra shifted to a new waltz, this one slightly faster. Mikhail adapted immediately, his counting speeding up to match the tempo. I twirled him carefully, earning a small sound of surprise that might have been delight. "You're doing wonderfully," I told him. "I like dancing," he replied, as if discovering this fact for himself. "The counting makes sense." "It does, doesn't it? Music is just math you can feel." This earned me another almost smile and a thoughtful nod. When the song ended, Mikhail stepped off my shoes and looked up, this time his gaze settling somewhere near my chin, the closest he'd come to eye contact. "Thank you for the dance," he said formally, like a miniature gentleman. "I'd like to go back to my table now." "Of course." I released his hands. "It was a pleasure dancing with you, Mikhail." He turned and walked directly to his father, who placed a protective hand on his shoulder. Volkov's eyes never left my face. "Miss," he let the question hang in the air. "Leo?" I supplied, resisting the urge to add just Leo, as if my lack of status needed clarification. "Thou?" He repeated my name, transformed in his mouth into something both beautiful and vaguely threatening. "You will join us." It wasn't a request. His hand moved slightly, and suddenly one of his men was beside me, not touching, but close enough that I understood I was being escorted. Panic fluttered in my chest. "Sir, I'm working." "I can't just." "It's been arranged." He cut me off, already turning toward Mikhail's table, his son walking perfectly in step beside him. I looked desperately around for Marcos and found him across the room, pointedly looking everywhere but at me. Message received. Whatever Alexander Volkov wanted, Alexander Volkov got, even if it was a waiter's time during a busy gala. I followed, acutely aware of the bodyguard at my back and the stairs following our strange procession. My uniform marked me as clearly as a neon sign among the evening gowns, and I fought the urge to tug at the polyester that suddenly felt like sandpaper against my skin. At the table, Volkov pulled out a chair for me, an oddly gentlemanly gesture from a man I'd heard had once controlled half the drug trade along the eastern seaboard. I perched on the edge, hands folded in my lap to hide their trembling. Mikhail immediately returned to arranging his silverware, but now he was humming the waltz under his breath, his small fingers working with methodical precision. "You dance well," Volkov said, his dark eyes studying me with unnerving intensity. "Thank you." I managed. "My mother taught me." "And where did you learn to see my son when everyone else chooses blindness?" The directness of the question caught me off guard. I glanced at Mikhail, who appeared absorbed in his task but was tilting his head slightly toward our conversation. "I have a son," I said softly. "He's 5. Children should never be invisible." Something dangerous flashed in Volkov's eyes. Yet in rooms like this, certain children remain unseen, unless they are perfect accessories for their perfect parents. The bitterness in his voice was so raw it startled me. For a moment, the feared Mafia boss disappeared, replaced by something I recognized all too well, a parent's fierce protectiveness. Mikhail likes the silverware, I observed, changing the subject. The pattern's right. Volkov's gaze sharpened. Yes. He finds comfort in order. My Leo has a collection of purple things, I said, smiling at the memory. Everything must be purple and arranged just so. He can tell if I've moved even one tiny bead. For a moment, silence stretched between us. Then Mikhail looked up, his eyes focused somewhere above my shoulder. Purple is opposite of yellow on the color wheel, he stated. It's made of red and blue. Primary colors make secondary colors when mixed. That's exactly right, I said, impressed. You know a lot about colors. I read the encyclopedia, he replied matter-of-factly. I'm on volume P. Despite the tension coiling in my stomach, I couldn't help but smile. That's amazing. I bet you know all kinds of interesting things. I do, he agreed without a hint of boasting. Dad, can Leo come to the library with us? I want to show him my books. I froze, my smile faltering. Volkov's expression remained unreadable, but I felt the weight of his assessment like a physical touch. Perhaps another time, Mikhail. It's getting late, and I'm sure Leo has other obligations. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by guilt at the slight droop of Mikhail's shoulders. Before I could think better of it, I heard myself say, I'd love to see your books someday, if your dad thinks it's okay. The words hung in the air between us, and I mentally cursed my loose tongue. You didn't make casual plans with a child of Harbor City's most notorious criminal. You especially didn't put him in a position where he had to refuse his son in public. To my surprise, Volkov's lips curved in what might have been the ghost of a smile. We shall see. One of his men approached, bending to whisper in his ear. Volkov's expression hardened instantly, his jaw tightening as he gave a sharp nod. We must leave, he announced, standing with fluid grace. Mikhail, it's time to go. The boy looked up, his face suddenly anxious. But it's only 9:17. You said we would stay until 10 o'clock. I saw Volkov's internal struggle play across his face, the need to depart warring with his son's distress at the disrupted schedule. Something has come up, son, he said, his voice gentler than I would have believed possible. Anton will take you home in the first car. I'll follow shortly. Mikhail's breathing quickened. That's not the plan. That's not what you said. I recognized the signs of approaching distress, the rigid posture, the slightly rocking motion, the increasingly frantic tone. Without thinking, I reached into my apron pocket and pulled out my secret weapon, a small stress ball shaped like a star that I carried for my own anxiety. Mikhail, I said softly, placing it on the table near his hand, not forcing it on him. This helps me when things change unexpectedly. You can squeeze it or roll it between your fingers. Would you like to try? He stared at the star, his breathing still rapid, but his attention captured. After a moment's hesitation, he picked it up, pressing it between his palms. It's squishy, he observed, some of the tension leaving his small frame. Yes, and it always returns to its shape, no matter how much you squeeze. It's kind of magical, isn't it? His fingers worked the star methodically, and gradually his breathing slowed. Volkov watched this exchange with an expression I couldn't decipher, something between surprise and calculation. You can keep it if you like, I offered. I have others at home. Thank you, Mikhail said formally. He turned to his father, the star clutched in his hand. I'm ready now. Volkov placed his hand on his son's shoulder, but his eyes were fixed on me. You have my gratitude, he said, each word precise and weighted. It should have been a dismissal. I should have nodded politely and returned to my duties. Instead, I found myself asking, will he be all right? Something dangerous flickered in Volkov's eyes, a reminder of exactly who I was addressing. My son is always taken care of, Miss Leo. His voice carried a warning I felt in my bones. Always. With that, he guided Mikhail away from the table. The boy clutched the stress star in one hand, his other firmly in his father's grasp. As they walked toward the exit, a path clear before them, no one daring to impede their progress. I exhaled slowly, only then realizing I'd been holding my breath. Whatever strange interlude I just experienced was over. Time to return to reality, to water glasses and champagne trays, and the desperate need to keep this job. I stood, smoothing my uniform, and turned, only to find one of Volkov's men blocking my path. He was mountain-shaped, with a neck as thick as my thigh and hands that looked capable of snapping bones without effort. "Mr. Volkov would like your contact information," he stated flatly. Fear spiked through me. My what? Why? The man's expression didn't change. "Your phone number." "Address." "I don't think that's." It wasn't a request. He produced a sleek phone and held it out to me, screen open to a new contact form. My hands trembled as I took the device. Self-preservation warred with terror as I typed in my information. What choice did I have? Refuse the most dangerous man in Harbor City? The bodyguard took the phone back, checking the information before slipping it into his jacket pocket. Without another word, he turned and walked away, following the path his employer had taken. I stood frozen for several heartbeats, my mind racing with the implications of what had just happened. Had I just placed myself, and by extension my son, on Alexander Volkov's radar? The thought made me physically ill. "Now?" Marcos materialized beside me, his voice a harsh whisper. "What the hell was that?" "I don't know," I answered honestly. I danced with his son. His son. Marcos looked stunned. "That was Volkov's kid." "Jesus, Lel. Do you have a death wish?" "He was just sitting there alone," I said defensively. Nobody was paying any attention to him. That's because people with brains know not to go anywhere near Volkov or his family. He ran a hand through his thinning hair. "Look, just get back to work. Dessert service starts in 10 minutes. And for God's sake, stay away from any more Mafia children." I nodded, grateful for the familiar routine to return to. As I headed back to the service area, I caught sight of Mikhail and his father at the entrance of the ballroom. The boy was looking back, his eyes scanning the crowd until they found me. He lifted his hand, the one holding my star, in a small wave. Without thinking, I waved back. Beside him, Alexander Volkov followed his son's gaze directly to me. Even across the room, the intensity of his stare made my skin heat. He inclined his head slightly, an acknowledgement. A promise or a warning, I couldn't tell. Then they were gone, swallowed by the night and their waiting cars, leaving me with nothing but the phantom sensation of small hands in mine and the lingering scent of danger. The next morning dawned gray and drizzling, matching my mood perfectly. I dragged myself from bed at 5:30 a.m., every muscle protesting after last night's 8-hour shift. My thoughts felt sluggish from too little sleep, but Sunday morning breakfast rush at Denny's waited for no one, especially not single Omega fathers with rent due in 5 days. I dressed quietly in the dim light filtering through my bedroom's thin curtains, careful not to wake Leo. He was curled on my bed, where I'd placed him after picking him up from Mom's at 2 a.m. His dark curls spilled across the pillow, one small hand clutched protectively around his favorite purple hippo. The sight of his peaceful face was both my greatest comfort and sharpest pain, knowing everything I did was for him, and it still wasn't enough. "I'll be back before you wake up, little star," I whispered, pressing a feather-light kiss to his forehead. Mom would arrive at 7 to watch him until I finished my shift at 3. The apartment was barely 600 square feet, with a kitchen so small you could touch both walls with outstretched arms. But I'd painted the walls cheerful colors and hung fairy lights around Leo's bed nook, trying to create magic from our meager circumstances. The stack of bills on the counter, red stamped with final notices, threatened to shatter that illusion. As I waited for the bus in the misty rain, my mind drifted back to last night, to Mikhail's solemn face lighting up as we danced, to his father's penetrating gaze that seemed to strip away all pretense. I shivered, and not just from the damp chill seeping through my thin jacket. What had possessed me to give my real contact information to Volkov's man? Self-preservation, yes, but also curiosity. A strange pull I couldn't name. Either way, it was done. There was nothing to do but hope I'd be instantly forgotten. A waiter who'd shown a moment's kindness, nothing more. The breakfast shift passed in a blur of pancake stacks and coffee refills. By mid-morning, my feet were throbbing, and I'd spilled orange juice down my uniform shirt, but the tips were decent, mostly from regulars who knew me by name and asked about Leo. These simple kindnesses kept me going on days when exhaustion threatened to pull me under. I was clearing a foretop by the window when Carmen, the hostess, appeared at my elbow. "Leo, there's someone asking for you." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "And, honey, he looks important. Like, scary important." My stomach dropped. "What does he look like?" "Tall, built like a boxer, buzz cut. Wearing a suit that probably costs more than my car. He's just standing there by the door. Hasn't sat down." Not Volkov himself, then. One of his men. I set down my bin of dirty dishes with suddenly trembling hands. "Tell him I'll be right there." I ducked into the bathroom first, splashing cold water on my face and trying to calm my racing heart. What could he possibly want? Had I unknowingly done something wrong? Said the wrong thing to Mikhail? The possibilities spiraled darker in my mind with each passing second. When I emerged, I spotted him immediately, standing near the entrance, his rigid posture and alertly scanning eyes marking him as security even without the telltale bulge of a shoulder holster beneath his jacket. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, with a face that might have been handsome if not for the jagged scar running from temple to jaw. He identified me immediately, his eyes tracking my approach with unsettling precision. "Leo Williams?" He confirmed. I nodded, too nervous to speak. "I'm Anton. I work for Mr. Volkov." He reached into his jacket, and I flinched involuntarily before realizing he was only retrieving an envelope. "For you." I stared at the cream-colored envelope in his extended hand. My name was written on the front in elegant script. "What is this?" I asked, making no move to take it. "Mr. Volkov, send his gratitude for your kindness to Mikhail." His face remained impassive. "Please." Hesitatingly, I accepted the envelope. It was heavy, expensive paper that felt rich between my fingers. "There's a car waiting when your shift ends at 3, Anton continued. "Mr. Volkov would like to speak with you." Ice flooded my veins. "I can't. I have to pick up my son. Arrangements have been made with your mother. She'll keep your son until 7 this evening." Panic clawed at my throat. "You contacted my mother?" "Mr. Volkov did. Early this morning." My mother hadn't mentioned anything when she arrived to watch Leo, which meant she'd been intimidated into silence. Or worse, bribed. "This isn't a request, is it?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Anton didn't bother pretending. "The car will be waiting at 3. Mr. Volkov doesn't like to be kept waiting." He turned to leave, then paused. "Mikhail asked about you this morning." The boy rarely speaks of anyone. With that cryptic statement, he walked out, leaving me clutching the envelope in trembling fingers. I retreated to the employee bathroom before opening it, half expecting to find a threat or a bribe. Instead, I found a handwritten note on thick, creamy paper. "Mr. Williams, your kindness to my son last night was unexpected and rare. Mikhail speaks of you this morning with unusual animation. I would like to express my gratitude in person. A car will collect you after your shift concludes at Denny's on Harborview Drive. You have my word that no harm will come to you. A. Volkov." Beneath the note was a second piece of paper, a check made out to Leo Williams for $5,000. I gasped, nearly dropping it. $5,000. Enough to clear my outstanding bills and still have a cushion left over. Enough to get the transmission in my ancient car fixed so I wouldn't have to rely on unreliable bus schedules. Enough to buy Leo new clothes for the coming winter. But why? For one dance with a lonely child? I slipped the check back into the envelope with shaking hands. This was dangerous territory. You didn't accept money from men like Alexander Volkov without understanding the cost. And yet, could I afford to return it? To refuse his invitation? The rest of my shift passed in a fog of anxiety. I dropped an entire tray of waters, mixed up 2 orders, and nearly collided with another server, all while my mind raced with scenarios, each more terrifying than the last. At precisely 3 o'clock, I clocked out and changed from my juice-stained uniform into the spare clothes I kept in my locker: jeans, a faded blue sweater, and worn sneakers. Hardly appropriate attire for meeting a man who probably wore suits to bed, but was all I had. As promised, a sleek black Mercedes waited at the curb outside Denny's. Anton stood beside it, opening the rear door as I approached. The parking lot suddenly felt exposed, and I was acutely aware of my coworkers watching through the windows. "Where are we going?" I asked, hesitating at the car door. "Mr. Volkov's residence," Anton replied. "It's about 40 minutes from here. I thought of Leo safely with my mother until 7. And I'll be back in time to pick up my son." "You have my employer's word." His employer's word. The word of a man who'd built an empire on violence and fear. And yet I found myself believing him, perhaps because I had no choice. I slid into the back seat, sinking into buttery leather softer than anything I'd ever touched. The car smelled of expensive cologne and new leather, and the privacy partition was already raised, separating me from the driver. Anton took the front passenger seat, and we pulled away from the curb. I clutched my purse in my lap, the envelope with its impossible check safely tucked inside. Through the tinted windows, I watched as Harbor City's familiar streets gave way to increasingly affluent neighborhoods and finally to the exclusive cliffside properties overlooking the bay. The car turned onto a private drive flanked by tall iron gates that opened silently as we approached. Ancient oaks created a natural canopy overhead, their branches filtering the afternoon sunlight into dappled patterns across the winding driveway. My anxiety mounted with each curve until finally the trees parted to reveal a sprawling stone mansion set against the dramatic backdrop of the bay. It was beautiful in a forbidding way, all clean lines and dark stone, with massive windows reflecting the gray waters beyond. Armed men patrolled the grounds, their movements casual yet purposeful. Security cameras tracked our approach with silent vigilance. The car circled a fountain before stopping at the front entrance. Anton opened my door, extending a hand to help me out. My legs felt unsteady as I stepped onto the cobblestone drive, the full impact of what I was doing finally hitting me. I was willingly entering the home of Harbor City's most dangerous man. "This way, please," Anton directed, leading me up wide stone steps to massive double doors that opened before we reached them. The entrance hall was cavernous, with soaring ceilings and a marble floor that echoed our footsteps. Modern art pieces, stark and probably worth more than I'd earn in a lifetime, adorned the walls. Despite the grandeur, the space felt oddly impersonal. More like a museum than a home. Anton guided me through a series of rooms, each more impressive than the last, until we reached what appeared to be a library. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound volumes. A massive desk dominated one end of the room, while comfortable-looking leather chairs were arranged around a fireplace at the other. "Wait here," Anton instructed. "Mr. Volkov will join you shortly." With that, he left, closing the heavy door behind him with a definitive click. Alone, I drifted to the nearest bookshelf, running my fingers along the spines of books in languages I couldn't identify, Russian probably, and what might have been German or Dutch. The collection was extensive and eclectic, everything from classical literature to modern physics. "Do you read Russian?" I whirled around, my heart leaping into my throat. Alexander Volkov stood in the doorway, watching me with those penetrating dark eyes. He'd exchanged his formal suit for charcoal slacks and a crisp white shirt open at the collar. The more casual attire did nothing to diminish his commanding presence. If anything, it made him seem more dangerous, like a predator at rest. His scent hit me again. Cedar and smoke and something darker beneath: power, dominance, alpha. It wrapped around me like a physical embrace, and I felt my omega instinct stir in response. My pulse quickened. My mouth went dry. No, I managed, pulling my hand back from the books as if burned. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. He waved away my apology. Books are meant to be touched, Mr. Williams. Otherwise, they are merely decorations. He moved into the room with that same predatory grace I'd noticed at the gala, every movement controlled and deliberate. Up close, without the distraction of the crowded ballroom, I could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. He wasn't young mid-40s, perhaps, but he carried himself with the confidence of a man accustomed to power. Please sit. He gestured to the seating area by the fireplace. I perched on the edge of one of the leather chairs, my back rigid, hands folded tightly in my lap. He took the seat opposite me, regarding me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. His scent was stronger here, in this enclosed space, overwhelming and intoxicating. You're afraid, he observed. Wouldn't you be? I countered before I could stop myself. To my surprise, a smile ghosted across his face. Yes, I suppose I would. An uncomfortable silence stretched between us. Finally, I reached into my purse and withdrew the envelope. I can't accept this, I said, placing it on the coffee table between us. It's too much. He didn't even glance at the envelope. It's nothing. Not to me. His eyes sharpened with interest. You're returning it out of pride? No, I said honestly. Out of self-preservation. I've lived in Harbor City long enough to know that nothing comes without strings attached. And you believe I would attach strings to gratitude for kindness shown to my son? The dangerous edge in his voice made me choose my next words carefully. I believe that in your world, everything has a price. I danced with Mikhail because he's a child who deserved to be seen. Not because I wanted anything in return. A rare perspective, he said, leaning back slightly. Tell me, Leo Williams, what do you know about me? The question felt like a trap. Only what everyone knows. That you're influential. Powerful. A diplomatic answer. His smile didn't reach his eyes. And yet you approached my son without hesitation. Either very brave or very foolish. I didn't know who he was, I admitted. Not until later. Would it have mattered? I considered the question seriously. No. He's a child first. Your son second. Something shifted in his expression, a softening so subtle I might have imagined it. He stood abruptly, moving to pour 2 glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter on a side table. Do you know why I asked you here? He said, his back to me. To thank me for being kind to Mikhail. I replied, the words feeling inadequate even as I spoke them. He returned, offering me one of the glasses. That's part of it. I accepted the drink automatically, though I had no intention of consuming alcohol in a situation that required all my wits. The glass was heavy in my hand, the crystal catching the late afternoon light streaming through the windows. Mikhail has difficulties, Volkov continued, resuming his seat. He experiences the world differently. Most people see only the challenges, not the gifts. He's autistic, I said quietly. My neighbor's son is on the spectrum. Different, not less. Volkov's gaze sharpened. You understand, then? Not completely, I admitted. Every child is unique. But I recognize when someone is being excluded because they don't fit neatly into expectations. He studied me over the rim of his glass. The world can be cruel to those who are different. I have spent years shielding my son from that cruelty, only to watch him be ignored by the very people who smile to my face and accept my donations. The bitterness in his voice was raw and unexpectedly human. I found myself wondering about the Omega who had given birth to Mikhail Volkov's mate or partner, now conspicuously absent. Where is his other parent? I asked before I could stop myself. His expression hardened instantly. That is not a topic for discussion. I'm sorry, I said quickly. That was inappropriate. He set down his glass with deliberate care. Mikhail asked about you this morning. He wanted to know if you would visit again. He rarely expresses interest in people outside our household. My heart twisted at the thought of the solemn little boy asking after me. He's a special child, I said. Yes. Volkov agreed, his voice softening fractionally. Which is why I'm offering you a position. Iblinka, sartain ide mishart. A position? As Mikhail's companion. 3 days a week from 4 until 8 in the evening. You would spend time with him, engage in activities he enjoys, perhaps expand his comfort with social situations. Your son will be welcome to join you here. I stared at him, speechless. You want to hire me to be friends with your son? Not friends, Volkov corrected, his tone precise. A companion. Someone who sees him as he is, not as others wish him to be. My mind raced with the implications. Why me? You could hire professionals. Therapists who specialize in working with autistic children. He has therapists, speech pathologists, behavioral specialists, a team of experts with impeccable credentials. His fingers tapped once against his knee, the only sign of impatience. What he lacks is someone who approached him naturally, without agenda, without fear. I swallowed hard, trying to process what he was suggesting. And my compensation, 5,000 per week. Plus expense. The glass nearly slipped from my fingers. Per week. My voice emerged as a strangled whisper. Is that insufficient? He asked with a casual air of someone discussing pocket change rather than more money than I made in 3 months. A hysterical laugh bubbled up in my throat, which I quickly suppressed. No, it's excessive. Not to me. His dark eyes studied me intently. Your time has value, Leo Williams. As does your unique ability to connect with my son. $20,000 a month. The numbers swam in my head, conjuring images of a life without constant financial terror. Leo in a better school, a safer apartment. No more juggling multiple jobs and still falling short every month. It was too good to be true, which meant it wasn't true. What's the real reason? I asked, setting my untouched drink on the table. This isn't just about Mikhail. Something dangerous flickered across his face, a reminder of exactly who I was dealing with. You question my motives regarding my own child? I fought the instinct to back down. I question why a man like you would bring a waiter from Denny's into his home, offer him an impossible sum of money, and expect nothing beyond spending time with his son. A man like me? He repeated, the words flat and cold. He crawled up my neck. I didn't mean. You did. He stood abruptly, moving to the window that overlooked the bay. His back to me, he continued. You know the rumors, the whispers. Harbor City's monster. The Russian who builds his fortune on blood and fear. I remained silent, uncertain how to respond to the truth we both knew. What you don't know, he continued, his voice dropping lower, is what it means to be a father to a child others would discard. To watch your flesh and blood be treated as invisible. Or worse, as defective. He turned back to me, and the raw emotion in his eyes caught me off guard. Last night, for 17 minutes, my son danced. He smiled. He connected with another human being who wasn't paid to tolerate his differences. His jaw tightened. So yes, Leo Williams. I'm offering you an impossible sum because that moment was priceless to me. Shame washed through me. Whatever else Alexander Volkov might be, and I had no illusions about the darkness his power was built on, his love for his son was genuine. I'm sorry, I said softly. I shouldn't have implied otherwise. He dismissed my apology with a slight gesture. Your suspicion is natural. In your position, I would feel the same. I twisted my hands in my lap, torn between the opportunity he was offering and the voice of caution screaming in my head. May I think about it? Of course. He moved back to his seat, resuming his composed demeanor. I'll need your answer by Wednesday. 3 days. 3 days to decide whether to entangle my life, and by extension Leo's, with Alexander Volkov's world. There's one more thing, he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He withdrew a small object and placed it on the table between us. My heart contracted. It was the stress star I'd given Mikhail, now slightly worn from constant handling. He hasn't let it out of his sight since last night, Volkov explained. He asked me to thank you properly for it. I stare at the small star, remembering how quickly it had calmed Mikhail's distress. He's welcome to keep it. He wanted you to see that he's taking good care of it. For the first time, a genuine smile softened Volkov's stern features. He's very concerned with doing things properly. The unexpected glimpse of normalcy, a father indulging his son's earnest request, caught me off guard. It humanized him in a way that made it harder to maintain my protective distance. Would you like to see him before you leave? Volkov asked. He's in his rooms upstairs. I hesitated, then nodded. Despite my reservations about Volkov's world, I couldn't deny my curiosity about Mikhail and his life here. And something in me wanted to ensure he was truly well cared for, not just another possession of a powerful man. Volkov led me from the library through a series of elegantly appointed rooms. The house was beautiful but sterile, lacking the warmth of a true family home. No photos adorned the walls, no casual clutter suggested everyday life. As we climbed a sweeping staircase to the second floor, I noticed the increased security presence. Men stationed at strategic points throughout the house, their attention snapping to us as we passed. Volkov acknowledged them with the barest nod, their presence clearly a normal part of his existence. We stopped outside a door painted a deep blue, unlike the other doors in the hallway. Blue is his favorite color, Volkov explained, noticing my observation. It calms him. He knocked in a specific pattern, 3 quick raps, pause, then 2 more. Come in, please, called Mikhail's precise voice from within. Volkov pushed open the door, revealing what could only be described as a child's paradise. The spacious room was meticulously organized into distinct zones, a reading nook with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a study area with a child-sized desk, a building station with elaborate Lego constructions, and a cozy bed area with star-pattern bedding. Mikhail sat cross-legged on a plush carpet, carefully assembling what appeared to be a complex model of the solar system. He looked up as we entered, his gaze focusing somewhere near my shoulder. Hello, Leo, he said, setting down the piece in his hand with careful precision. You came to our house. I did. I smiled. Your dad invited me. You have a beautiful room. He nodded matter-of-factly. I designed the layout myself. Everything has a place. He stood, moving with the same deliberate grace I'd noticed at the gala. Would you like to see my books? I have 342. I'd love to, I replied honestly. He led me to his bookshelves, pointing out his favorites with solemn pride. His collection was impressive for any child, let alone a 6-year-old, ranging from illustrated encyclopedias to advanced texts on astronomy and mathematics. This one explains black holes, he said, pulling out a book clearly intended for much older readers. The math is fascinating. As he showed me his treasures, I observed his interactions with his father. Volkov stood slightly apart, giving his son space, but his eyes never left Mikhail. When the boy occasionally looked to him for confirmation or approval, Volkov responded with immediate focused attention, never dismissive, never distracted. Dad got me this one yesterday, Mikhail continued, showing me a beautifully illustrated book about marine life. Because I want to be a marine biologist. Or maybe an astronaut. I haven't decided yet. You have plenty of time to decide, I assured him. Dad says I can be anything I want, Mikhail stated with absolute certainty. As long as I work hard and follow the rules. The phrase sounded rehearsed, a mantra repeated often enough to be internalized. I glanced at Volkov, wondering what other rules his son was expected to follow. Mikhail, Volkov said gently. Leo needs to return home to his son soon. Is there anything else you'd like to show him first? Disappointment flickered across the boy's face, but he nodded in understanding. Just one more thing. He crossed to his desk and carefully opened a drawer, removing something wrapped in a blue cloth. With deliberate movements, He unwrapped it to reveal a small music box made of polished wood. "This was my other father's," he said, his voice softer now. "Dad gave it to me to keep safe." He wound a key at the base of the box and opened the lid. A haunting melody filled the room, something classical that I couldn't identify but found unexpectedly moving. "It's Tchaikovsky," Mikhail explained. "Swan Lake." My father danced to it when he was young. I felt rather than saw Volkov's tension at the mention of Mikhail's other parent, but he made no move to interrupt, watching his son with an unreadable expression. "It's beautiful," I said as the melody faded. "Thank you for sharing it with me." Mikhail carefully rewrapped the music box and returned it to its drawer. "Will you come back?" he asked, his gaze fixed somewhere over my left shoulder. "To see the rest of my books?" The direct question caught me unprepared. I looked to Volkov, who merely raised an eyebrow, leaving the response entirely to me. "I hope so," I said carefully. "Your dad and I are talking about me visiting you sometimes." This seemed to satisfy him. "Good. I like that." He turned to his father. "Can Leo bring his son next time?" "You said he has a son." "His name is Leo Jr.," I supplied. "But we call him Leo." "He's 5. Mikhail considered this information with serious deliberation. "I don't have many books for 5-year-olds. But I could share my building blocks. The wooden ones, not the Legos. Legos have small pieces." The thoughtfulness of his concern touched me deeply. "That's very considerate, Mikhail. Leo would love wooden blocks." Volkov placed a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. "It's time for Leo to go now." "What do we say?" "Thank you for visiting," Mikhail recited, then added with unprompted sincerity, "I'm glad you came to our house." "I'm glad too," I replied, surprised to find I meant it. Volkov escorted me from the room after Mikhail returned to his solar system model. As we walked back downstairs, I found myself reassessing everything I thought I knew about Alexander Volkov. The tenderness he showed his son couldn't be faked. The patience and understanding he demonstrated with Mikhail's need spoke of years of dedicated parenting, none of which erased the darker truths about who he was and how he'd acquired his power. At the foot of the stairs, he broke the silence. "You see now why I asked you here." It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway. "He's an extraordinary child," I said. "Yes," he agreed. "And like all extraordinary things, vulnerable to those who fear or envy what they don't understand." There was history in that statement, pain and perhaps violence that I didn't dare probe. Instead, I asked the question that had been forming since I'd first set foot in this beautiful fortress-like home. Where is his other father? This time, Volkov didn't shut down the inquiry. His jaw tightened, but after a moment he answered, "Dead. 4 years ago." The stark finality of the word hung between us. I thought of Mikhail, only 2 when he lost his father, too young to form many lasting memories, yet old enough to feel the absence. "I'm sorry," I said softly. "That must have been incredibly difficult for both of you." Something flashed in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, at my simple acknowledgement of his grief alongside his son's. "Life continues," he said, his accent thickening slightly. "For his sake, if nothing else." We reached the entrance hall, where Anton waited discreetly by the front doors. Our time was clearly at an end. "The offer stands," Volkov said, his businesslike tone returning. 3 days a week, 4 to 8. Your son is welcome. Anton will provide you with a phone for direct communication. For security reasons. A phone that would undoubtedly be monitored, I realized. Just one of many ways my life would change if I accepted his offer. Wednesday, I confirmed, still uncertain what my answer would be. He extended his hand, the gesture oddly formal after the intimacy of meeting his son and glimpsing his private grief. I placed my hand in his, expecting a brief professional handshake. Instead, he held it a moment longer than necessary, his fingers warm and strong around mine. "Mikhail rarely connects with strangers," he said, his voice low. "Whatever you decide, thank you for seeing my son when others looked away." He released my hand, and I felt the ghost of his touch linger against my skin. Anton will drive you home. With that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the depths of his mansion. I stood for a moment, still feeling the impression of his hand on mine, before following Anton out to the waiting car. The drive back to the city passed in silence. I watched the landscape change from exclusive estates to middle-class neighborhoods and finally to my own run-down apartment complex. Anton pulled up to the curb with precise timing, exactly 6:45 p.m., giving me 15 minutes to reach my mother's apartment on the next block. "Mr. Volkov asked me to return this to you," Anton said as he opened my door. He handed me the envelope I'd left on the coffee table. "He insists." I started to protest, but something in Anton's expression stopped me. "This isn't about the job offer." "No," he confirmed. "This is for last night. Separate matter." I hesitated, then accepted the envelope. "Thank you for the ride." Anton's stern face softened fractionally. "Mikhail has been through much." You made him smile. Before I could respond, he was back in the car, pulling away from the curb with silent efficiency. I stood on the sidewalk, clutching the envelope and trying to make sense of the day's events. The rational part of me screamed that I should run as far as possible from Alexander Volkov and his world. But another part, the part that had seen Mikhail's careful handling of his treasured possessions and the grief hidden beneath his father's controlled exterior, wasn't so certain. As I walked to my mother's apartment to retrieve Leo, the impossible decision weighed on me. $20,000 a month would change our lives completely. But what other costs would come with binding ourselves to the Volkov family? The envelope felt heavy in my hand, a tangible reminder of the choice before me, and the man behind the offer, whose dark eyes seemed to see straight through to my core. 3 days later, I gave Alexander Volkov my answer. I accepted the position. The first paycheck arrived exactly as promised, a sum so staggering I stared at the bank notification for a full 5 minutes before believing it was real. I paid off our outstanding bills, secured a better apartment in a safer neighborhood, and put the rest aside for Leo's future. The second check came with an unexpected bonus, tuition for Leo at Harbor Prep, the city's most exclusive preschool. I'd initially balked at the gesture, seeing it as overstepping. But Volkov had framed it as a practical solution to our scheduling challenges. Having Leo in a school 5 minutes from his estate made it easier for me to bring him along on my visits. So here I was, 3 weeks later, driving along the winding coastal road to the Volkov mansion with Leo chattering excitedly in the backseat. "Daddy, are we really going to the big house again?" He bounced in his car seat, his dark curls flying with each movement. His excitement had been building since I told him we'd be visiting a special friend today. "Yes, little star. Remember what we talked about. Be polite, use my inside voice," he recited. "And Mikhail might not want hugs or high fives, and that's okay." "Perfect." I smiled at him through the rearview mirror. 3 weeks of twice-weekly visits to the Volkov mansion. 3 weeks of Mikhail gradually opening up under Leo's uninhibited chatter and my patient presence. 3 weeks of the strange double life I now led, waiter by morning, companion to a Mafia boss's son by evening. "Will Mr. V have cookies today?" Leo asked, pulling me from my thoughts. I suppressed a smile at his nickname for Alexander Volkov, the name he'd given him when he couldn't pronounce his full name. To my ongoing astonishment, Volkov hadn't corrected him. Despite his fearsome reputation, he never failed to have Leo's favorite chocolate chip cookies freshly made for our visits. The gates to the estate opened as we approached, the security team now familiar with my modest Honda. I parked in a circular driveway, helping Leo unbuckle his seatbelt. He immediately reached for his small purple backpack containing treasures he wanted to show Mikhail. Anton greeted us at the front door with a nod that had grown almost warm over the weeks. "They're in the garden room." I followed the now familiar path through the mansion, Leo skipping ahead. With each visit, the house felt less like a museum and more like what it actually was, a home, albeit an extraordinarily luxurious one. The garden room was a recent discovery, a stunning conservatory filled with exotic plants and comfortable seating, offering views of both the meticulously landscaped gardens and the bay beyond. It had quickly become Mikhail's favorite place for our visits. The natural light and organized plant specimens provided both comfort and stimulation for him. Leo Jr. Mikhail's voice called out as we entered. He stood from his position at a small table, covered with botanical specimens, careful not to disturb his arrangement. Though he didn't approach for physical contact, his entire demeanor brightened. "You're exactly on time." 4:27. Volkov rose from where he'd been sitting nearby, closing a leather portfolio. "Leo Williams." "Young Leo." His formal greeting was belied by the warmth in his eyes as he looked at my son. His scent wrapped around me, that intoxicating blend of cedar and smoke and alpha dominance that made my omega instinct sing. I'd grown more accustomed to it over the weeks, but it still affected me more than I wanted to admit. "Cook has prepared refreshment," Volkov continued. "Cookies?" Leo asked hopefully, already eyeing the covered tray on a side table. The corner of Volkov's mouth twitched, the closest he came to smiling in casual conversation. "Perhaps after activities." I reminded Leo gently. "What are you working on today, Mikhail?" "Plant classifications," he explained, leading us back to his table. "Dad brought specimens from the greenhouse. I'm organizing them by family, genus, and species." While Mikhail solemnly showed Leo his categorization system, I found myself standing beside Volkov, watching our children interact. "He draws them out," Volkov observed quietly. "It's good for him. It's good for Leo too," I admitted. "He's learning patience, consideration for others' needs." Something that might have been approval flickered across Volkov's features. Over the weeks, I'd become more adept at reading his subtle expressions, the slight tension around his eyes when concerned, the barely perceptible softening of his mouth when pleased. It was like learning a foreign language, decoding the careful restraint that masked his emotions. "There's something we need to discuss," he said, his voice pitched low enough that the children couldn't hear. "Later." Uneasiness flickered through me, despite the comfortable routine we'd established. I never forgot who Alexander Volkov was, what he did when he wasn't being a devoted father or unexpectedly thoughtful employer. The world he inhabited remained largely invisible during our visits, but occasionally reality intruded in the form of urgent calls, grim-faced men delivering messages, or discussions that stopped abruptly when I entered a room. I nodded, pushing my concern aside to focus on the children. For the next hour, Mikhail led us through his botanical classification system with meticulous precision, while Leo asked questions that would have tested the patience of most 6-year-olds. Mikhail answered each one carefully, his knowledge of plants impressive for a child of any age. After cookies and milk, served on fine china that had made me nervous at first but which Leo now handled with exaggerated care, the children moved to the carpeted area where Mikhail kept a set of wooden building blocks specifically for Leo's visits. "May I speak with you now?" Volkov asked, gesturing toward the adjoining terrace. I glanced at the children, engaged in collaborative building. "We'll just be on the terrace," I told them. "Call if you need anything." The October air carried a crisp chill as we stepped outside. Below, armed guards patrolled the perimeter of the property, their dark figures stark against the manicured lawns. The juxtaposition was jarring, the idyllic scene of children playing inside, the heavily armed security outside. Volkov stood at the stone balustrade, his profile sharp against the darkening sky. His scent was stronger out here, carried in the salt-tinged breeze. "Mikhail's birthday is in 2 weeks," he said. "Not what I'd been expecting." "That's wonderful. Is there something special planned?" "I'm hosting a small gathering here. Family. A few trusted associates." He turned to face me, his expression carefully neutral. "I would like you and Leo to attend." I blinked in surprise. Are you sure that's appropriate?" "Mikhail has requested it specifically." A faint smile touched his lips. He's never asked for guests at his birthday before. Only scientific equipment or books. Pride warmed my chest at the progress we'd made with Mikhail. "Then of course we'll come." "What time?" The gathering begins at 2. He hesitated, something unusual for a man who always chose his words with precision. There is another matter. The serious tone in his voice set off warning bells. What is it? There has been a situation. Nothing that concerns you directly, but precautions are necessary. His jaw tightened. Additional security measures have been implemented around the estate. You may notice more personnel during your visits. A situation, I repeated carefully. Is Mikhail in danger? No. His answer was immediate. And I would never allow that. The unspoken implication hung heavy in the air. He would eliminate any threat to his son by whatever means necessary. It was a stark reminder of exactly who I was working for. Should I be concerned? I asked directly. His dark eyes studied me, weighing something in his mind. No, but it would be prudent for you to accept a security detail for the next few weeks. For both you and Leo. The suggestion sent ice through my veins. Security? You mean guards? Following us discreetly. They would maintain distance. You would hardly notice their presence, except for the fact that they'd be armed men watching my 5-year-old, I replied, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Alexander, what's really going on? His expression sharpened at my use of his first name, something I rarely did, maintaining professional boundaries despite the growing familiarity between us. But fear for Leo had pushed formality aside. A business rival has made certain threats, he said finally. Nothing unusual in my world. But I take no chances where Mikhail is concerned. Or those connected to him. Those connected to him. The words settled over me like a physical weight. In just 3 weeks, Leo and I had become linked to the Volkov family in ways I hadn't fully considered. What had started as a job, albeit an unusual one, had become something more complex. Mikhail looked forward to our visits with increasing excitement. Leo asked about him constantly. And Alexander. I caught myself before completing that thought. Whatever growing awareness existed between us remained unspoken, a current of tension neither of us acknowledged. I don't want Leo exposed to violence, I said firmly, or even the suggestion of it. Neither do I. His voice softened unexpectedly. That is precisely why I'm offering protection. The security would be invisible to him. Just another car on the street. Another parent at the school gate. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold despite my sweater. How dangerous is this rival? He is a desperate man making desperate moves, Alexander replied, his accent thickening slightly, a tell I'd noticed emerged when his emotions ran high. But he will be dealt with shortly. The clinical way he discussed what would undoubtedly be a violent resolution should have horrified me. Instead, I found myself numb to the implication, focused only on Leo's safety. 1 week, I decided. We'll accept the security for 1 week. And if this situation isn't resolved by then, Leo and I will need to take a break from these visits until it is. I expected argument or cold dismissal. Instead, he nodded once, accepting my terms. Reasonable. We stood in silence for a moment, the gulf between our worlds never more apparent than in this conversation about security details and business rivals. I never intended to bring this aspect of my life into yours, he said finally, surprising me with what sounded like genuine regret. When I offered you this position, I believed I could keep these worlds separate. I knew who you were, I reminded him quietly. I made my choice with open eyes. He studied me with that penetrating gaze that seemed to see far more than I intended to reveal. Did you? Or did necessity make the choice for you? The question struck uncomfortably close to truth. Had I accepted his offer because of Mikhail's need for connection, or because of the financial security it offered Leo? Both were true. But increasingly, neither felt like the complete answer. Before I could respond, Leo's voice called from inside. Daddy, Mikhail showed me how to make a perfect symmetrical tower. Coming, sweetheart. I called back, grateful for the interruption. As we turned to go inside, Alexander's hand caught mine briefly, a touch so light it could have been accidental except for the deliberate pressure of his fingers against my palm. "Thank you," he said simply, "for understanding." The warmth of his touch lingered as we rejoined the children, who proudly displayed their architectural creation. Mikhail launched into a detailed explanation of structural principles, his earlier reserve completely gone as he shared his knowledge with infectious enthusiasm. Watching him, I realized how much he'd changed in just 3 weeks. Still preferring order and precision, still most comfortable with facts and systems, but increasingly willing to engage, to share, to connect. It wasn't just my influence. I knew it was Leo's unquestioning acceptance, his natural ability to meet Mikhail exactly where he was. As the evening continued with a lesson in constellations that Mikhail had prepared especially for Leo, I caught Alexander watching me with an expression I couldn't quite define. When our eyes met, he didn't look away, holding my gaze with an intensity that sent warmth spreading through my chest. In that moment, I acknowledged the truth I'd been avoiding. This arrangement had ceased to be simply a job. Somewhere between Mikhail's careful explanations and Leo's delighted discoveries, between Alexander's subtle acts of thoughtfulness and the growing ease between us, something had shifted. Dangerous or not, complicated or not, I cared for this unusual family. Daddy said I could be a scientist when I grow up, Mikhail was telling Leo, using the Russian diminutive for father that had begun to replace the more formal dad in recent days. "I thought you wanted to be an astronaut," Leo replied, carefully placing a star sticker on the constellation map Mikhail had created. "I can be both," he said with absolute certainty. "Yes, you can," Alexander confirmed, his voice warm with pride and something else, hope perhaps. As Mikhail and Leo returned to their stars, Alexander looked at me again. This time, the unspoken connection between us felt impossible to deny. "Stay for dinner," he said quietly. "Both of you. Please." It wasn't a command. It was an invitation, genuine and unexpectedly vulnerable. I should have said no. I should have maintained the boundaries that kept us both safe. Instead, I heard myself say, "We'd love to." The smile that crossed his face transformed him completely, still dangerous, still powerful, but softened by something that looked almost like happiness. It took my breath away. Dinner was served in a smaller, more intimate dining room than I'd expected. The table was round, not long and formal, making it easier for conversation. Mikhail sat beside Leo, carefully explaining the proper arrangement of silverware, while Leo nodded along with exaggerated seriousness. Alexander sat across from me, watching us all with an expression I was beginning to recognize as contentment. The food was exquisite, some kind of roasted meat with vegetables I couldn't identify, served on plates that probably cost more than my monthly rent. But what struck me most wasn't the luxury. It was the normalcy, the easy rhythm of conversation. The way Mikhail contributed to the discussion in his precise, thoughtful way. The way Alexander asked Leo about his favorite subjects at school and actually listened to the answer. "You like cooking?" Leo asked Alexander, who was helping him cut his meat. "I have a chef," Alexander replied, "but I can make a few things. Pancakes for Mikhail. He prefers them a certain way. Fluffy," Mikhail supplied, "not flat. And they have to be round." "Perfectly round. Perfectly round," Alexander repeated, and the fondness in his voice was unmistakable. I watched them, this unlikely family. The feared Mafia boss, patient and gentle with his autistic son. The brilliant child, slowly opening up to the world. And my own son, innocent and accepting, asking questions and offering friendship without hesitation. "Leo," Alexander said, turning to me. His voice was low, meant for me alone. "I want you to know, whatever happens with this situation I mentioned, you and your son will be protected. I give you my word, his word, the word of a man who'd built an empire on violence. And yet, looking into his dark eyes, I believed him." "Thank you," I said softly. After dinner, the children retired to Mikhail's room to look at his books while Alexander and I lingered in the dining room. The candles had burned low, casting dancing shadows across the walls. His scent wrapped around me, that intoxicating blend of cedar and smoke and alpha dominance that made my instincts sing. "You're worried," he observed. "I can sense it. About the situation you mentioned?" "Yes." I met his eyes. "About what it means for Leo. For us." He reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine. The touch was electric, a spark that traveled up my arm and settled somewhere deep in my chest. His scent intensified, responding to something in my own. "I will not let anything happen to you," he said, his voice rough. "Or to your son. You have to believe that. Ido." And I realized, with some surprise, that I meant it. "But Alexander, what is this? What are we doing?" He was silent for a long moment. Then he stood, moving around the table to stand beside me. He didn't touch me, but his presence was overwhelming, that powerful alpha aura wrapping around me like a blanket. "I don't know what this is," he admitted. "I only know that I haven't felt this in a very long time. Perhaps ever." I looked up at him, my omega instincts warring with my caution. "This isn't just about Mikhail anymore, is it?" "No," he said simply. "It hasn't been for a while. I should have pulled away. I should have maintained the careful distance that kept my son safe and my heart protected. Instead, I leaned into his presence, letting his scent wash over me. I'm scared, I admit it. Not of you, not anymore. But of what this means. Of what could happen to Leo if someone uses us to get to you." His expression darkened. "Anyone who threatens you or your son will answer to me personally. And I assure you, my justice is not something they would survive. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it was oddly comforting, the promise of protection from a man whose power was absolute. "I need to check on Leo," I said finally, though I made no move to leave. "Of course." He stepped back, giving me space. But his eyes never left mine. "Leo, I meant what I said. Whatever you decide about this, about us, you'll always be protected." I nodded, unable to speak past the sudden tightness in my throat. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. We retrieved the children from Mikhail's room, Leo proudly showing me a drawing he'd made, Mikhail explaining the intricate details of a new model he was building. Alexander drove us home himself, which he'd never done before, his presence filling the car with warmth and security. When we arrived at our new apartment, a modest but safe two-bedroom in a better neighborhood, he walked us to the door. Leo, half asleep, waved goodnight with drowsy enthusiasm. Alexander crouched down to his level. "It was an honor to have you at our home, Leo Jr., he said formally. "You are welcome any time." Leo's eyes went wide. "Really? Even if it's not a special day?" "Especially then," Alexander replied. "We could always use more friends at our house." After Leo was tucked into bed, I returned to the front door where Alexander still stood. His gaze swept over me, taking in my worn jeans, my faded sweater, my bare feet. It wasn't assessing. It was simply seeing. "I should go," he said. But he didn't move. "Thank you," I said again. "For tonight. For everything." He reached out, cupping my face in his hand. His palm was warm against my cheek, his thumb tracing a gentle path along my jaw. His scent enveloped me, cedar and smoke and something else, something deeper, more intimate. "Alpha. Mine. You have no idea what you've done for us," he murmured. "For Mikhail. For me." "Alexander." His lips brushed my forehead, a touch so gentle it brought tears to my eyes. "Sleep well, Leo Williams," he whispered. "I'll see you soon." Then he was gone, disappearing into the night, leaving me standing at the door with the ghost of his touch still burning on my skin and the fading scent of his alpha presence swirling around me. I had no idea what was coming, what danger lurked in the shadows of his world, what impossible future lay ahead for us. But for the first time in years, I let myself hope. And that hope, fragile and precious, was worth every risk. 6 months later, the ballroom was different tonight. Still glittering with chandeliers, still filled with the elite of Harbor City. But I wasn't invisible anymore. I stood at Alexander's side, my hand resting in the crook of his arm, my body wrapped in silk that had been chosen specifically for me. He wore black, as always, perfectly tailored, devastatingly handsome. His scent was a steady warmth at my back, a constant reminder of the bond we shared. The mating mark on my neck was hidden beneath the collar of my dress, but I could feel it pulsing with warmth, a permanent connection to the alpha beside me. Alexander had claimed me 3 months ago. During his rut, a desperate, passionate affair that had shattered every wall I'd built around my heart. He'd bitten down gently, marking me as his, and I'd welcomed it. "Are you nervous?" he murmured, his lips brushing my ear. Terrified, I admitted. "Mikhail's birthday party. With all these people who hate you." "They don't hate me," he corrected, amusement coloring his voice. "They fear me. There's a difference. The difference being they'll pretend to like me until I turn around. Then they'll deal with me." His hand covered mine, squeezing gently. "No one will dare look at you wrong. Not when you're wearing my mark." It was possessive, protective, so incredibly alpha. And I loved it. Mikhail was on the dance floor with Leo, teaching him the steps to a waltz. They moved together with careful precision, Mikhail counting under his breath, Leo giggling as he inevitably stepped on his friend's feet. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. "When you first approached him," Alexander said quietly, following my gaze, "I knew you were different. No one had ever seen him. Not really. Not the way you did. I just saw a lonely child," I said. "That's all. That's everything." He turned me to face him, his dark eyes intense. "You saw my son when everyone else looked away. You saw me when everyone else saw the monster. You gave us a chance. Alexander, I love you," he said simply. I never thought I'd say that again. After Mikhail's father died, I thought that part of me was gone forever. But you brought it back. You brought us both back to life. The words hit me like a physical blow, warm and overwhelming, and so completely unexpected. I opened my mouth to respond, but Mikhail's voice cut through the moment. Leo Jr. They're playing our song." Without hesitation, Alexander and I moved toward the dance floor, joining our sons. His hand found my waist, pulling me close against him. His scent wrapped around me, cedar and smoke and home. "Shall we, my Omega?" he murmured. "Always, my Alpha." We danced as the crowd watched, the feared Mafia boss and his waiter mate, the invisible child and his perfect son. A family built from nothing, held together by love and hope, and the simple act of seeing someone when everyone else looked away. And in that moment, surrounded by warmth and laughter, and the scent of my Alpha, I knew I had found where I belonged. Then,